Part 1. Teach E. Farmer from Kiiskinen, December 17, 1905. The Grand Duchy of Finland. The village of Rotjärvi. The boy was born in a small wooden house, surrounded by forest and lake, in a land that belonged to the Tsar, but dreamed of being something else. Finland was not yet a nation, it was a Grand Duchy, a quiet corner of the Russian Empire, where people spoke Finnish and Swedish, where winters lasted half the year, and where survival depended on the land. His name was Simo Häyhä, the seventh child in a family of farmers. His parents, Juho and Katriina, had already raised 6 children when he arrived. They had no way of knowing that this quiet boy would one day become a legend. The farm was called Häyhä, as was the custom. The family took its name from the land they worked. It was a small holding, a few fields, a forest, a sauna by the lake. The work was endless, cutting wood, tending animals, planting, and harvesting in the brief northern summer. The children learned early that survival required effort, patience, and silence. Simo was the smallest of them all. Even as a young man, he would stand only 160 centimeters tall, barely over 5 feet. But what he lacked in size, he made up for in stillness. He could sit motionless for hours, watching, waiting, observing the forest around him. His father gave him his first rifle when he was 10 years old. It was an old weapon, a hand-me-down, but to the boy it was everything. He learned to shoot by hunting small game, squirrels, hares, birds. The forest became his classroom. He learned to read tracks, to move without sound, to let the cold and hunger pass through him without complaint. In the long winters, when the snow lay deep over the fields, he would put on his skis and disappear into the white. The family knew he would return when he was ready. He always did. The Civil Guard. At 17, Simo did what many young men in the countryside did. He joined the Suojeluskunta, the Civil Guard. It was a volunteer organization, a kind of home defense force, born from the chaos of the Finnish Civil War that had torn the country apart just a few years before. In the villages, the Civil Guard was a social institution, a place where men practiced shooting, learned military skills, and prepared to defend their homes against an enemy that might one day come. Simo did not join for politics. He joined because he loved to shoot. The Civil Guard had competitions, and he won them. His prizes filled the family home: silver cups, certificates, engraved medals. But if you looked at the photographs of those competitions, you would not find him. He always stood in the back row, half hidden behind the others. He did not like attention. He did not like to be seen. The other shooters noticed him, of course. They talked about the little man from Rotjärvi who never missed. But when the competitions ended, Simo simply put on his coat and walked home, back to the farm, back to the forest, back to the silence. The photographs. There is a photograph from those years, taken sometime in the 1920s or 1930s. It shows a group of civil guardsmen in their uniforms standing stiffly for the camera. In the back row, almost lost among the taller men, a small figure stares directly into the lens. His face is serious, unreadable. His eyes are calm. That is Simo Häyhä, already a man who knew how to wait, how to watch, how to remain unseen. He did not know, in that moment, that the world was about to change. He did not know that a great war was coming, that his country would be invaded, that his name would become a legend. He only knew that the forest was calling, and that he would answer. The farmer from Rotjärvi was ready. Part 2. Teach Silent Training 1925. Southern Finland. The Bicycle Battalion. The train pulled into the station at a small town north of Helsinki, and a young man in civilian clothes stepped onto the platform. He was 19 years old, small, quiet, carrying nothing but a small bag and the certainty that he would do what was asked of him. The conscription notice had arrived months before, and now Simo Häyhä was joining the army. Finland in the 1920s was still learning to be a nation. The Civil War, that bitter conflict between Reds and Whites, had ended only 7 years before, leaving wounds that would take generations to heal. The army was a work in progress, a mix of German-trained officers, Russian-era equipment, and young men from every corner of the country. Simo was assigned to a bicycle battalion, a unit that moved on wheels when roads allowed and on foot when they did not. He did not stand out. He was not tall, not loud, not ambitious. He did what he was told, kept his head down, and waited for the day when he could return to the forest. But something happened during that service. The army taught him to shoot properly, not at squirrels and hares, but at targets, at distance, under pressure. He learned to estimate range, to adjust for wind, to hold his breath and squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. The instructors noticed that the small man from Rotjarvi rarely missed. When his conscription ended, he did not go home and forget. He joined the Civil Guard, the volunteer organization where men like him practiced their skills in their spare time. The Civil Guard was everywhere in rural Finland, a network of local units that trained in the evenings, competed on weekends, and kept the nation ready for a war that everyone hoped would never come. The competitions. On Sundays, the men gathered at the shooting range. They came in their best clothes, carrying their own rifles, eager to test themselves against their neighbors. The competitions were serious affairs, trophies, certificates, the quiet pride of being the best. Simo won. Again and again. His room at the family farm filled with prizes, silver cups gleaming on the shelves, certificates hanging on the walls. But if you looked at the group photographs from those competitions, you would not find him. He always stood in the back row, half hidden behind the taller man, his face serious, his eyes looking somewhere beyond the camera. He did not seek attention. He sought perfection. The other shooters talked about him. They called him the ghost sometimes because he appeared at the range, did his shooting, and disappeared back into the forest before anyone could congratulate him. He did not drink with them afterward. He did not tell stories. He simply went home. 1938, Utri. The sniper course. A year before the war, the army called him again. This time it was different. This time they wanted him for something specific, a sniper course at the training center in Utri. For weeks, he learned the craft that would make him legendary. Shooting at extreme ranges, reading the terrain, moving without sound, hiding in plain sight. The instructors were impressed, not by his speed, but by his patience. He could lie motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. He could judge distance to within a single meter, a skill that Major Saralainen, his future biographer, would later call almost supernatural. When the course ended, he returned to the farm. The rifles were cleaned and put away. The trophies gathered dust on the shelves. He tended his fields, hunted in the forest, and waited for the life he had always known to continue. He did not know that the world was about to change. He did not know that in less than a year, he would be lying in the snow at Kollaa, his rifle before him, the enemy advancing through the white. But the training was done. The craftsman was ready. Part 3, THE Winter WAR. THE Order November 30th, 1939. The Finnish-Soviet border. 6:50 a.m. The morning was still dark when the guns began to fire. Along the entire frontier, from the Gulf of Finland to the Arctic Ocean, Soviet artillery opened up, sending thousands of shells crashing into Finnish territory. There had been no declaration of war, no ultimatum, no warning. Only the thunder of guns and the screams of the first wounded. In the village of Rotjarvi, Simo Häyhä was already awake. He had heard the news the night before. The Soviet Union had broken off diplomatic relations, and everyone knew what that meant. Now, as the distant rumble of artillery rolled across the frozen lakes, he pulled on his white camouflage smock, checked his rifle one last time, and kissed his mother goodbye. "I will come back," he said. He did not know if that was true. The numbers. The Soviet Union attacked with 450,000 men, 2,000 tanks, and 1,000 aircraft. Finland had 300,000 men, 32 tanks, and 114 aircraft. Against the might of the Red Army, the Finns could offer only determination, knowledge of the terrain, and a willingness to fight for every inch of their homeland. The Soviet soldiers wore dark brown uniforms, clearly visible against the white snow. They advanced in dense columns, following roads through the forest, easy targets for marksmen hidden in the trees. The Finnish soldiers wore white, moved on skis, and struck from ambush before disappearing back into the wilderness. It was a war of David against Goliath. And David had learned to shoot. The march. Simo reported to his unit, the 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34. His commander was Lieutenant Arne Juutalainen, a tough veteran known as the Horror of Morocco for his service in the French Foreign Legion. Juutalainen took one look at the small, quiet man with the hunting rifle and assigned him to a position near the Kollaa River. "You shoot," Juutalainen said. "We'll handle the rest." Simo nodded. That was all he needed to hear. The position. The Kollaa sector was supposed to be indefensible. Flat, open, with few natural barriers, the Soviet commanders assumed their tanks would roll right through. But the Finns had learned to fight in the forest, to use the snow as cover, to make every kilometer cost the enemy thousands of lives. Simo found a spot near the front line, a slight rise in the terrain that gave him a view of the approaches. He built a low wall of snow in front of his position, packing it dense enough to stop a bullet and hide the flash of his muzzle. He put snow in his mouth to keep his breath from steaming in the cold air. And he waited. The temperature was minus 40 degrees Celsius. He did not move for hours. The first kill. A column of Soviet soldiers appeared on the road, marching in formation, their dark figures sharp against the white. They had no idea they were being watched. They had no idea that a man with a rifle was lying in the snow, his finger resting lightly on the trigger, his breath held, his eyes calm. The range was 400 meters. Simo estimated it, adjusted for the wind, and fired. The lead soldier crumpled. The column stopped, confused. A second shot. A third. Men began to run, to shout, to look for cover that did not exist. Simo reloaded and fired again. And again. And again. When it was over, the road was empty. The dead lay where they had fallen, their dark forms scattered across the white. Simo picked up his rifle and moved to a new position. He had been in one place too long. It was time to disappear. The propaganda. Word of the sniper spread quickly through the Finnish lines. Men talked about the small hunter from Rotjärvi who never missed, who could lie motionless for hours, who seemed to appear and vanish like a ghost. The officers began to count his kills. On December 21st, just 3 weeks into the war, he shot 25 men in a single day. The number was almost unbelievable, but the witnesses confirmed it. The legend of the White Death was born. In Helsinki, the newspapers picked up the story. They called him the Magic Shooter and the White Death. They turned him into a symbol of Finnish resistance, a hero for a nation fighting alone against a giant. Propaganda posters showed a white-clad figure aiming through the snow with the caption, "We fight for our homes." Simo never read the newspapers. He was in the forest, lying in the snow, his rifle before him. The enemy was still coming, and he had work to do. Part 4, Kollaa. Teach E. Forest, O.F. Death, December 1939. The Kollaa River. The front line. The Kollaa sector was not supposed to hold. The terrain was flat, open, with few natural barriers, ideal ground for tanks, for massed infantry, for the kind of warfare the Red Army had trained to fight. The Finnish commanders had drawn their defensive lines along the river, knowing that if the enemy broke through here, there was nothing behind them but open road to the heart of Finland. The temperature had dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. The snow lay deep over everything, covering the frozen rivers, the sparse forests, the low hills. Men froze to death in their sleep, their bodies stiffening before anyone noticed they had stopped breathing. Rifles jammed. Machine guns froze. Even the vodka the Soviet soldiers carried turned to ice in their canteens. Simo Häyhä lay in the snow, his white smock pulled over his head, his breath controlled so that no telltale vapor rose from his position. Before him, he had built a small wall of snow, packed tight enough to stop a bullet and hide the flash of his muzzle. He rested his rifle on it, the familiar weight of the M/28-30 steady in his hands. He did not use a telescopic sight. The glass would fog in the cold, or frost over, or catch the light and betray his position. More importantly, a scope required the shooter to raise his head slightly higher, making him a target. Simo kept his head down, his eye close to the iron sights, his body merged with the snow. He had learned this in the forests of Rotjärvi, hunting squirrels as a boy. The squirrels were small, fast, hidden in the branches. To hit one, you had to wait. To wait without moving, without breathing, without thinking about the cold. He had learned patience then. Now he would need it more than ever. The first records. The Soviet columns advanced along the roads, their dark brown uniforms sharp against the white. They marched in formation, as if on parade, their officers shouting orders that carried across the frozen air. They did not know that death was watching from the tree line. Simo fired. A man fell. He worked the bolt, aimed, fired again. Another fell. The column halted, confused, looking for an enemy they could not see. The third shot dropped their officer. The fourth sent the rest scrambling for cover. That day, he killed 25 men. His comrades began to count. The officers sent observers to verify. They returned shaking their heads, their notebooks filled with numbers that seemed impossible. By December 22nd, just 3 weeks into the war, his total had reached 138. The men called him the White Death now, though no one was sure who first used the name. The Soviet soldiers whispered it in their trenches, a ghost story to explain the comrades who vanished when they stepped into the open. The Finnish newspapers picked it up, turning the quiet farmer into a national hero. Simo did not care about any of that. He was in the forest, lying in the snow, waiting for the next target to appear. The routine. Every day was the same. He rose before dawn, ate a piece of bread and some sugar for energy, and moved to his position. He lay there until sunset, motionless, watching. Sometimes he shot. Sometimes he only watched, counting the enemy, memorizing their positions, waiting for the perfect moment. The cold was his enemy as much as the Russians. He wrapped himself in layers, but the cold still found its way through. He learned to move his toes inside his boots, his fingers inside his mittens, keeping the blood flowing without betraying his position. He kept snow in his mouth, melting it slowly, because the steam of his breath would rise like a signal. At night, he returned to the trench, to the dugout, to the brief warmth of a fire. The other men looked at him strangely. He did not joke, did not drink, did not share stories. He sat in the corner, cleaning his rifle, his eyes distant, already back in the white. The Christmas photograph. On Christmas Eve, 1939, a photographer from the Esikuva archive arrived at the Kollaa front. He gathered the men of the 6th Company, Infantry Regiment 34, for a photograph. They stood in the snow, their white smocks stained with mud, their faces drawn with exhaustion and cold. A chaplain stood before them, leading them in a Christmas hymn. The photograph would become one of the most famous images of the Winter War. It shows the men of the Marikarvia Horror, the company commanded by Captain Arnju Delanet, the tough veteran known as the Terror of Morocco. It shows the chaplain, Antti Rantama, a member of parliament who had volunteered for the front. But Simo Häyhä is not in the photograph. He was on duty that day, lying in the snow, watching the enemy lines. The hymn that rose from the gathered men might have reached him, drifting across the frozen air. If it did, he gave no sign. He had work to do. Behind him, somewhere in the Soviet lines, the enemy was waiting. And in the morning, the killing would begin again. Part 5. Teach E-Count reaches hundreds December 22, 1939, Kollaa. The Finnish lines. Evening. The chaplain, Antti Rantama, sat in the dugout, his pencil moving across a small notebook. He had been keeping records since the war began, names, dates, numbers. The men brought him their reports, and he wrote them down, a cold accounting of the deaths they had inflicted on the enemy. Tonight, the number was extraordinary. Simo Häyhä had been on the front for 22 days. In that time, according to the witnesses, according to the officers who had watched through binoculars, according to the cold mathematics of war, he had killed 138 Soviet soldiers. 138 men. An average of more than 6 per day. In temperatures that froze rifles solid, in snow that blinded, in a landscape where the enemy was invisible until the moment they died. Rantama wrote the number in his notebook and closed it. He would report it to division headquarters in the morning. They would confirm it, or they would not. Either way, the legend was growing. The observers. The officers did not believe it at first. They sent observers to watch Häyhä, to count for themselves. The observers returned shaking their heads, their own notebooks filled with numbers that seemed impossible. On December 21st, Häyhä had killed 25 men in a single day. 25. The observers had watched him work, the small figure in white, invisible against the snow, the careful placement of each shot, the methodical reloading, the complete absence of hurry or fear. He had fired 25 times, and 25 men had died. After that, no one questioned the numbers anymore. January 26, 1940. The new total. The war continued. The cold deepened. The snow fell and froze and fell again. And Häyhä lay in his position, day after day, his rifle before him, his eyes scanning the white. On January 26, the count reached 199. 61 men in 35 days. The average had dropped. The enemy was more cautious now, more careful, more afraid. But the killing continued. The men around him began to treat him differently. They spoke to him in hushed tones, as if he were something other than human. They brought him food, fetched him water, watched over him while he slept. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a talisman, a protector, a proof that Finland could fight back. February 17, 1940. The honorary rifle. The message came from division headquarters. General Antero Svensson, commanding the 12th Division, wanted to see Häyhä. The sniper was to report to the rear area, where the general would present him with an award. Häyhä did not want to go. He had work to do. But orders were orders. He skied to the rear, his white smock stained with use, his face expressionless. The general met him in a small cabin, away from the shelling. Before him on a table lay a rifle, a Model 28. Specially made, polished, gleaming in the lamplight. In recognition of your 219 confirmed kills, the general said, I present you with this rifle, the gift of a grateful nation. Häyhä looked at the rifle, then at the general. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply took the weapon, nodded, and turned to leave. The general stopped him. A photograph, Corporal. For the newspapers. Häyhä stood still while the photographer worked. The image that survives shows him holding the rifle, his face serious, his eyes already looking beyond the camera, back to the snow, back to the killing ground. He does not look like a man receiving an honor. He looks like a man who wants to return to work. The list of sins. In his private diary, the one he would hide for decades, Häyhä kept a different count. He did not call it kills, or victories, or accomplishments. He called it his sin list. When the war ended, when the final number was tallied, 500 or 505 or 542, depending on who counted, he wrote it down and closed the book. He would never speak of it publicly. He would never boast, never explain, never justify. Tassa on minun syntilastani, he wrote. This is my list of sins. He did not mean it ironically. He meant it exactly. He had killed 500 men. That was not a thing to celebrate. It was a thing to bear, to carry, to live with for the rest of his life. The photograph. The photograph from February 17, 1940, survives in the Finnish military archives. It shows a small man in a worn uniform, holding a rifle that gleams with newness. His face is thin, weathered, expressionless. He looks like a farmer, which he was. He looks like a hunter, which he was. He does not look like a killer, though he was that too. Behind him, the snow stretches into nothing. The war continues. The enemy waits. And Simo Häyhä, the deadliest sniper in history, has work to do. In 3 weeks, a bullet will tear through his face and nearly kill him. But he does not know that yet. For now, there is only the snow, the rifle, and the endless white. The count has reached 219. There will be more. There are always more. Part 6. The White Death, December 1939. Kollaa. The Soviet lines. Night. The name began somewhere in the Soviet trenches, passed in whispers between terrified men who had seen their comrades die without ever seeing the shooter. Belaya Smert. The White Death. It was not a compliment. It was a prayer, a curse, a description of something beyond human understanding. The legend grew with each body pulled from the snow. Soldiers who had advanced confidently in the morning returned at dusk as corpses pulled on sledges. Officers who shouted orders one moment lay silent the next, their faces frozen in surprise. The forest itself seemed alive with malevolence, and at its center was a man no one could see. Some historians suggest that the name White Death may have originated in Finnish propaganda rather than from the Soviets themselves. According to information from prisoners, to the Russians, White Death actually referred to the severe frost in the deep forest, not a human sniper. But whether the Soviets gave him the name or the Finns created it, the effect was the same. The White Death became a symbol of Finnish resistance, a ghost that haunted the dreams of every Soviet soldier on the Kollaa front. The hunters become the hunted. The Red Army did not take the losses quietly. They sent their own snipers to find and kill the man who was killing them. Small teams of Soviet marksmen, experienced shooters with scoped rifles, slipped into the forest to hunt the White Death. They never returned. One by one, they fell to Häyhä's iron sights. He could read the forest, could see where another sniper would hide, could wait longer and move more quietly than anyone they had ever faced. The Soviet snipers were good, but they were hunting a man who had learned patience in the forests of Rotjärvi since childhood. After the snipers failed, the Soviets turned to heavier weapons. They called in artillery strikes on entire sections of forest where they suspected Häyhä might be hiding. Thousands of shells crashed into the trees, shredding branches, churning the snow into gray slush. When the barrage ended, the gunners waited for silence. Then the shooting started again. Häyhä had moved during the bombardment, using the noise to mask his retreat, and found a new position. The artillery had killed trees. It had not killed him. The Soviets placed a bounty on his head. The exact amount varies in different accounts, but the message was clear. The White Death must die. Soldiers who had never seen him began to imagine him everywhere. Units refused to advance into areas where he was known to operate. The psychological impact was as devastating as the bullets themselves. The photographs that do not exist. There is a strange irony in Häyhä's fame. The Finnish newspapers celebrated him as the magic shooter, Taika Ampuja. They wrote stories about his exploits, built a hero of mythical proportions for a nation desperate for good news. But there are almost no photographs of him from the front. He did not pose for the camera. He did not give interviews. When the photographers came to Kollaa, Häyhä was in the forest, lying in the snow, doing his work. The famous image of him holding the honorary rifle in February 1940 was taken at headquarters, far from the front, and even then he looks uncomfortable, eager to return to his position. The White Death remained invisible even in death's own country. The legend grows. By January 1940, the name White Death had spread beyond the front lines. Finnish newspapers published stories about the sniper who had killed hundreds of Russians. International journalists picked up the tale. In London and Paris and New York, readers marveled at the small farmer who had become a one-man army. The Finnish propaganda machine embraced the story. In a war where Finland was hopelessly outnumbered, heroes like Häyhä gave the people hope. They proved that one man could make a difference, that courage and skill could stand against overwhelming force, that the White Death was watching over Finland from the snow. Häyhä himself never commented on any of this. He was in the forest, his rifle before him, his eyes on the white. He had work to do. And the legend, whether he wanted it or not, grew with every kill. Part 7. Teach E. Wounding March 6, 1940. Kollaa. The finish lines. Late afternoon. The sun hung low over the snow, casting long shadows across the frozen battlefield. It had been 100 days since the war began, 100 days of lying in the snow, of watching, of waiting, of killing. Simo Häyhä had survived artillery barrages, counter-sniper hunts, and temperatures that froze men in their tracks. He had killed more than 500 men, a number that would never be surpassed. His luck was about to run out. That afternoon, Häyhä was engaged in a close range, fighting alongside his comrades in the trenches near Kollaa. The details of the moment remain unclear, but the result was devastating. A Soviet soldier fired a shot. Some accounts say it was an explosive bullet, a type of ammunition that was supposed to be banned. The bullet struck Häyhä in the lower left jaw, tearing through his face and exiting somewhere near his left eye. The impact was catastrophic. The left side of his face was destroyed, bones shattered, flesh torn, blood pouring into the snow. Häyhä collapsed without a sound, his body crumpling into the white. The rescue. His comrades saw him fall. For a moment, no one moved. The sniper who had seemed invincible, the White Death himself, lay motionless in the snow. Then they ran. They dragged him out of the line of fire, his blood painting a red trail across the white. Later, they would say that half his face was simply gone, the jaw hanging, the cheek missing, the eye socket empty. He was still alive, but barely. They loaded him onto a sled, threw him on top of a pile of dead bodies. There was no time to be gentle, and sent him toward the rear. On the sled, someone noticed that his leg was twitching. He was still alive. They pulled him from the pile of corpses and rushed him to a field hospital. The coma. Häyhä did not wake up when the doctors began their work. He did not feel the needles, the scalpels, the stitching. He had slipped into a coma, a deep darkness from which there was no guarantee of return. The doctors did what they could. The wound was terrible. A bullet had carried bone fragments, teeth, and debris deep into the tissue. They cleaned the wound, stabilized him, and waited. There was nothing else to do. Days passed. The war continued without him. March 13, 1940. The hospital. Morning. On the day the war ended, Häyhä opened his eyes. He did not know that the peace treaty had been signed the night before. He did not know that Finland had surrendered, that the territories he had fought for were lost, that the Winter War was over. He only knew that he was alive, and that his face was no longer his own. The doctors told him later he had been in a coma for over a week. He had woken on the very day the guns fell silent. It would be the first of many miracles. Their reconstruction. Häyhä's face was rebuilt over the next year and a half. He underwent 26 separate operations. Surgeons took bone from his hip to reconstruct his shattered jaw. They rebuilt his cheek, his eye socket, his mouth. They worked slowly, carefully, trying to restore something like a human face to the man who had been a ghost. When they were done, the left side of his face was permanently disfigured. He could not open his mouth as wide as before. He ate slowly, carefully, for the rest of his life. But he was alive. A photograph from the post-war years shows him standing stiffly, his face scarred, his expression unreadable. The left side of his jaw is visibly different, a reminder of the bullet that nearly killed him. The photograph. That does exist. There are photographs of Häyhä after his wounding. They show a man who has been rebuilt, reconstructed, reassembled. The face is not the same face that went to war. The jaw is wrong, the cheek is flat, the eye is slightly off. But the eyes are the same, calm, distant, unreadable. In one of these photographs, he is an old man, sitting in a chair, looking at something beyond the camera. The scars have softened with age, but they are still there. They are the marks of March 6, 1940. The day the White Death almost died. Part 8. Waking to a Changed World. March 13, 1940. A field hospital in Finland. Morning. The light was soft, filtered through frost-covered windows. Simo Häyhä opened his eyes and did not know where he was. He did not know how long he had been there. He did not know that the war had ended that very day. The peace treaty signed the night before in Moscow. His face was gone. Not literally, he could feel that it was still there, wrapped in bandages, heavy and numb. But the left side, the jaw, the cheek, they were no longer his. A Soviet explosive bullet had torn through him on March 6, shattering bone, destroying flesh, leaving a wound so terrible that his comrades had first placed him on a pile of corpses, thinking him dead. Only a twitching leg had saved him from that pile. He had been unconscious for a week. The long recovery. The doctors told him later what they had done. 26 operations. Bone taken from his hip to rebuild his shattered jaw. Skin grafted, tissue reconstructed. The left side of his face slowly reassembled into something resembling a human being. It would take more than a year before he could leave the hospital, and even then, the scars would remain forever. A photograph from 1940, taken after his promotion, shows the damage clearly. The left side of his face is visibly different, the jawline wrong, the cheek flattened, the expression forever altered. He looks directly at the camera, his eyes as calm as ever, but the face is no longer the face of the man who went to war. The promotion. While he lay in the hospital, recovering from wounds that would have killed most men, news arrived from headquarters. Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, Commander-in-Chief of the Finnish Armed Forces, had signed an order promoting him from corporal to second lieutenant. It was an unprecedented leap. In the Finnish military, such a promotion was almost unheard of, a direct jump from the lowest non-commissioned rank to an officer's commission. But Mannerheim understood what Häyhä had done. More than 500 confirmed kills, the highest number in any major war, accomplished in less than 100 days with iron sights and white camouflage. He deserved the recognition. Häyhä accepted the promotion quietly, as he accepted everything. He did not seek attention, did not want fame. But the honors kept coming: the Cross of Liberty, 3rd and 4th class, the Medal of Liberty, 1st and 2nd class, the Kollaa Battle Cross in silver, a rare award given to only a few. His country knew what he had done, even if he would never speak of it. The photograph. There is a photograph from this period, taken sometime in 1940 after his recovery had begun. Häyhä sits stiffly in his new officer's uniform, the insignia of a second lieutenant on his collar. His face is still healing, the left side visibly damaged, the jawline irregular, the expression fixed in a way that suggests pain barely hidden. But his eyes are the same, calm, distant, unreadable. He looks like a man who has seen too much and said too little. A man who carries a weight that cannot be shared. The question. Years later, a journalist would ask him if he regretted the killing. Häyhä's answer was simple, direct, devoid of sentiment. I only did my duty, and what I was told to do as well as I could. Another asked what he felt when he pulled the trigger. Dan Ruxtus, he said in German, slipping into a language he rarely used. The recoil. Not hate. Not glory. Not satisfaction. Just the physical fact of the rifle kicking back against his shoulder. The rest was not his to feel. The return. When the doctors finally released him, Häyhä did not return to the army. The war was over, at least for Finland. The peace treaty had cost them territory, including parts of his home region of Rajärvi, but the nation survived. He had done his part. He went back to the land. Back to the forests, the lakes, the silence he had always loved. The farmer from Kiiskinen, who had become the deadliest sniper in history, simply went home. But he was not the same man who had left. The face was different. The body was scarred. And somewhere inside, in a place he would never discuss, the sin list grew heavier with each passing year. In his private memoir, written months after the wounding, he had estimated the total, around 500. 500 men. 500 families. 500 souls. Tassa on Minun Sidalastani, he wrote. This is my list of sins. He would carry that list for the rest of his life. Part 9. THE Quiet YE 1,945 rupees. Ruokolahti, Finland. The Häyhä farm. The war was over. Not just the winter war, but the continuation war that followed, the Lapland war that came after, all of it finished. Finland had survived, battered and bruised, but independent. And Simo Häyhä, the deadliest sniper in history, had come home. The farm looked the same as it had before the war. The same fields, the same forest, the same sauna by the lake. But Simo was not the same. His face had been rebuilt over 26 operations, but the left side was permanently disfigured, the jawline wrong, the cheek flattened, the expression forever altered. He ate slowly, carefully, for the rest of his life. The bullet that had nearly killed him left marks that would never fade. He did not speak of the war. He did not tell stories, did not give interviews, did not seek attention. The man who had killed over 500 enemy soldiers simply returned to the land, to the work he had always known. He farmed. He hunted. He lived. The moose hunter. The forests of Ruokolahti became his sanctuary. Simo had always been a hunter, but now hunting became something more, a return to the silence he loved, a way to be alone with his thoughts. He became a successful moose hunter, respected throughout the region for his skill and patience. His reputation grew so great that word reached the highest levels of Finnish society. Urho Kekkonen, the 8th president of Finland, invited him on hunting trips. Imagine the scene, the president of Finland walking through the forest with the White Death, tracking moose together. Simo never spoke of those trips. He would never have boasted about such things. But those who knew him understood the honor it represented. The dog breeder. Simo also became a successful dog breeder. He raised Karelian bear dogs, a Finnish breed known for its courage, its silence, its ability to hunt large game. The dogs suited him perfectly, quiet, patient, deadly when they needed to be. There is a photograph from 1961 that shows him with his dog, Kill. He stands in the snow, his face scarred but calm, his hand resting on the dog's back. He looks like what he is, a man who belongs in the forest, who understands animals better than people, who has found peace in the simple rhythms of the hunt. The questions. Occasionally, journalists found their way to his door. They came with notebooks and cameras, hoping to interview the legend. Simo received them politely but gave them little. He was not interested in fame, in glory, in reliving the war. In 1998, a reporter asked him how he had become such a good sniper. Simo's answer was characteristically brief, practice. Another asked if he regretted killing so many men. He replied, I only did what I was told to do as well as I could. That was all. No speeches. No justifications. No guilt, no pride, no drama. Just a simple statement of duty, of service, of a job done and finished. The sin list. But in private, Simo carried something heavier. In his wartime diary, discovered decades later, he had kept a different count, not of victories, not of accomplishments, but of something he called my list of sins. 500 names, 500 families, 500 souls. He never spoke of it. He never sought absolution. He simply carried it, as he carried his scars, as he carried the memory of those 100 days in the snow. When asked in 2002, just before his 96th birthday, if the list haunted him, he gave the same answer: I only did my duty. The words were the same, but perhaps, after 60 years, they meant something different. The last hunt. In his final years, Simo lived quietly in Ruokolahti, a small municipality in southeastern Finland near the Russian border. The land he had fought for lay just a few kilometers away, some of it now lost to the peace treaty, some of it still Finnish. He could look across the border and remember. He still hunted when he could. Still walked the forest he had known since childhood. Still carried himself with the patience and stillness that had made him legendary. The last photograph of him, taken sometime in the late 1990s, shows an old man in a winter coat, his face weathered and scarred, his eyes still calm, still distant, still unreadable. He looks like any Finnish grandfather, until you notice the scars and remember what they mean. The peace. Simo Häyhä did not fear death. He had faced it too many times to be afraid. When it finally came, on April 1, 2002, he was ready. He died in a war veterans nursing home in Hämeenä at the age of 96. His body was returned to Ruokolahti and buried in the church graveyard, beneath a simple stone inscribed with 3 words: Koti, Uskonto, Isänmaa, home, religion, fatherland. The White Death was gone. But the forest remembers. And in the snow, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the silence of the man who hid there, waiting, watching, doing his duty. Part 10, 96 years of silence, April 1, 2002. Hämeenä, Finland. A war veterans nursing home, dawn. The morning was quiet, as mornings always were. Simo Häyhä had spent 96 years in silence, and silence was how he left. In a small room in a veteran's home, the deadliest sniper in history closed his eyes for the last time. He had been fading for months. His body, scarred by 26 operations and a bullet that had torn away half his face, finally gave out. The farmer from Rotjärvi, the hunter who had killed more than 500 men in less than 100 days, was gone. The burial. They buried him in Ruokolahti, in the church graveyard near the Russian border. The stone is simple, carved with 3 words that sum up everything he believed. Koti, Uskonto, Isänmaa, home, religion, fatherland. Those who came to pay their respects were few. Simo had never wanted crowds. He had spent his life avoiding attention, standing in the back row of photographs, disappearing into the forest. His funeral reflected that. Family, a few old friends, the quiet dignity of a life completed. The discovery. 15 years later, in 2017, something extraordinary happened. A private war memoir written by Häyhä in 1940, just months after his wounding, was discovered. He had called it Sotamuistoja, War Memories. Hidden for decades, it revealed for the first time what he had never spoken of publicly. On its pages, in his own hand, was what he called his sin list. He estimated that he had shot around 500 Soviet soldiers during the Winter War. The number was higher than any official count, higher than anyone had ever confirmed. But it was his own accounting, written in the aftermath of war, when the memories were still fresh and the blood still seemed real. He had carried that list for 62 years without speaking of it. He had taken it to his grave. But the words survived, and through them, his voice finally spoke. The legacy grows. After his death, something unexpected happened. Simo Häyhä became famous. Not just in Finland, where he had always been a legend, but around the world. Military historians studied his techniques, the iron sights, the snow in his mouth, the low profile, the obsessive preparation. Snipers everywhere learned his name. Books were written about him, including Tapio Saralainen's The White Sniper, based on dozens of interviews conducted between 1997 and 2002. But his fame spread beyond military circles. Heavy metal bands wrote songs about him. Japanese manga comics featured characters based on his legend. Subcultures around the world adopted him as a symbol of quiet efficiency, of lethal skill, of the lone warrior against impossible odds. The quiet farmer from Kiiskinen, who had stood in the back of photographs to avoid attention, became a global icon. The museum. In Rajärvi, near the places where he grew up and fought, the Kollaa and Simo Häyhä Museum preserves his memory. Founded in the early 1980s by the veterans of the Battle of Kollaa, it opened in its current form in 2017. Downstairs, a permanent exhibition is dedicated to his life. Authentic items, letters, and photographs fill the cases. Visitors from around the world come to see them 7,700 in 2025 alone. They stand before his rifle, his medals, his personal effects, trying to understand the man behind the myth. Outside, a memorial stone rises where visitors can place their own stones in tribute. And there, in concrete, are the footsteps of Simo Häyhä, a path for those who follow. The meaning. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine and Finland subsequently joined NATO, interest in Häyhä surged again. A new generation discovered the story of the small nation that stood against a giant and the farmer who did his duty. What did it mean? Perhaps that courage is not about size. Perhaps that duty is not about glory. Perhaps that a man can kill 500 enemies and still go home, still farm, still hunt, still live quietly among his neighbors. When asked in 1998 if he regretted what he had done, Simo gave his last public answer: "I only did what I was told to do as well as I could." When asked how he became such a good shooter, his answer was even shorter: practice. No philosophy. No justification. No guilt and no pride. Just a simple statement of work done, of duty fulfilled, of a life lived. The photograph. There is one last photograph. It was taken sometime in the late 1990s, when Simo was in his 90s. He sits in a chair, an old man in a cardigan, his face weathered and scarred. The left side of his jaw is visibly different, the legacy of the bullet that nearly killed him 60 years before. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking somewhere beyond it, into the distance, into the past. Perhaps he sees the snow at Kollaa. Perhaps he sees the faces of the men he killed, this sin list that he carried for so long. Or perhaps he sees nothing. Perhaps he is simply an old man, tired and ready, waiting for the silence to finally take him. The photograph does not answer. It only shows us what we already know, that some stories cannot be told, some weights cannot be shared, some men carry their burdens alone. Simo Häyhä died on April 1, 2002. He was 96 years old. The White Death was gone. But the forest remembers. And in the snow, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the silence of the man who hid there, waiting, watching, doing his duty. Home, religion, fatherland. It was enough.